I'm Trisha Carrington. I run laundromats and a few albums here in Florida. Nothing flashy, just steady work I built with my own hands. Before I tell you the rest, let me ask one thing. Where are you watching from? Stay close. This won't take long. The morning my life split in two started like any other. I left before sunrise to check a machine at one shop, then head to a turnover. First light, empty streets. I tapped the brakes at the first light and felt the pedal sink too soft. Noted it. Planned to get it checked after my stops. A few blocks later I pressed again and the pedal dropped to the floor. No catch. No resistance. Just air. I downshifted, pumped the pedal out of instinct, pulled the parking brake. Tires skated. I remember the curb, a flash of another bumper. The seatbelt cutting across my chest, and then quiet. People ran toward me. Don't move. Siren. Backboard. Tampa General's ceilings rolling by. The doctors told me straight. I survived. My spine took damage that would keep my legs silent. They showed the scans, explained the level, the swelling, the plan. No promises about walking. No sugarcoating. I heard every word, nodded, and started a mental list. Who to call, what to shift, how to keep the businesses moving while my body learned a new normal. Victor, my husband, stood by the bed saying he'd handle things. He squeezed my hand, told me to rest. Erica came in close and held on. Vincent hovered near the wall, quiet. The nurse went over transfers and breathing work. The physical therapist taught me new routes for old movements. How to turn without twisting, how to move from bed to chair without fighting my own body. It wasn't brave. It was work. I made peace with what the scan said because denial doesn't pay invoices. Wheelchair rehab schedule. 1 hour to the next. I told myself the same thing I tell staff on a bad day. Handle what's in front of you. Back then I called it bad luck. Mechanical failure. Wrong place, wrong morning. I accepted the chair because the facts said accept it. What I didn't know, what none of us in that room knew, was that the brake line of my life hadn't just failed, had been pushed. I wouldn't see that truth yet. For now I was alive, I wasn't walking, and I had an empire to keep breathing. The rest of the story was already moving toward me. Stay with me. Before that crash rewrote my life, I had carved out something for myself brick by brick. I wasn't born into money. Everything I had came from years of folding other people's clothes, keeping receipts neat, and learning how to stretch one store into 3. My laundromats weren't glamorous, but they were dependable. The regulars knew me, and I knew them. Folks dropping quarters, hauling baskets, bringing in uniforms, kids' jerseys, and church clothes all the same. I built my reputation on consistency. If I told a customer their wash would be ready by 5, they could set their watch by it. That mattered in a town like ours. When the albums came, it wasn't because I was chasing some trend. It was because I saw opportunity in houses folks were ignoring. A little paint, some smart furniture, and reliable cleaners turned empty spaces into cash flow. I didn't just rent out rooms. I curated experiences. Guests left 5-star reviews talking about how they felt at home. That meant something to me. My little empire wasn't flashy, but it was solid. And for a black woman in Florida trying to make her own lane, that was no small thing. After the accident, all of that changed. Victor, my husband, stepped in quick. On paper, he was helping. He started by answering calls when I couldn't, then signing checks when I was still in rehab. First, I was grateful. The pain kept me tired, and the ramp at the house was barely finished before invoices and vendor calls piled up. But Victor didn't just help. He moved in on everything. He told my employees to report to him directly. He sat in my office chair like it belonged to him. He showed up at laundromats I built from scratch and walked the floor as if he'd been the one who fought landlords for fair leases. And with the herbs, he positioned himself as the point of contact, telling me guests needed a single voice to deal with. He said it was about efficiency. I heard control. Little by little, I felt myself being erased from what I'd created. I would ask about daily numbers and he'd say, "Don't worry about that, I've got it." I'd try to give instructions to a worker, only to find he had already given them different orders. The business phone, the emails, even the bank cards. He rerouted everything through himself. He framed it as protecting me from stress. But the truth was simple. He liked the power. I noticed how employees looked more at him than me when questions came up. I noticed how the tone shifted in meetings, like I was the guest, not the owner. Victor's presence wasn't supportive. It was suffocating. My independence, the very thing I had built all those years, was slipping out of my hands right when I needed it most. Losing my legs was one thing. Losing my freedom in my own businesses was another wound entirely. And the worst part, he acted like I should be grateful for it. Like his takeover was some kind of favor I didn't have the right to question. But I've always paid attention. And even in the quiet, even sitting in that chair, I was still watching. Because when something is yours, built from your sweat and your faith, you can feel every inch of it when someone tries to steal it. And Victor might have thought he was doing me a kindness. But I could already tell. He was laying claim to what he hadn't built. And that was a battle he didn't know he'd just started. Victor didn't just help manage. He made my empire his playground. The first red flags came through whispers, things staff thought I couldn't handle hearing. I didn't confront them right away, but I listened. And every whisper pointed back to Victor. Keisha Brown was one of my brightest workers at the laundromat, sharp with customers, fast with her hands, always willing to pick up an extra shift. She was young, ambitious, and trusting. Exactly the type Victor preyed on. It didn't take long before people noticed him hanging around the shop at hours. He had no reason to be there. Closing doors he had no right to close. The same man who told me he was keeping things afloat was using my business to feed his ego and his lust. It didn't stop there. Danielle Moore, another worker, came to me careful, nervous, lowering her voice like she was scared of being overheard. She said Victor had started treating the staff like property, raising his voice, docking pay without explanation, threatening to cut hours if anyone questioned him. He made himself the king of an empire he didn't build. Meanwhile, the cash that used to stack steady in my accounts started bleeding. Deliveries were late, bills slipped behind, and I noticed little changes. New clothes in Victor's closet, receipts that didn't match, restaurant charges that had no reason to be there. He wasn't just using my businesses as his hunting ground for women. He was funding his lifestyle with money I worked years to build. That's when Ned Walker, my godson and accountant, stepped in. Ned had always been loyal. He grew up around me, treated my businesses like they mattered because he saw me sweat to build them. When Victor pushed me out of my own financial records, Ned quietly kept me informed. He'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, sliding me copies of statements, circling withdrawals, highlighting transfers. "Look at this," he'd whisper. 2,000 out for supplies, but no supplier invoice attached. This one. Payment to a hotel card. And here. Cash withdrawals back to back. Piece by piece, I saw the betrayal spread. Victor thought I was blind, sitting in that chair while he built himself into some kind of self-styled king. But the truth was, I knew more about his dirt than he realized. Ned made sure of that. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the disrespect. The workers who once looked up to me were now being cornered and intimidated. My businesses that once ran on honesty and trust were being turned into something dirty under his hands. And the man who was supposed to be my partner was acting like I was the obstacle in his way, not the reason he had any of it to begin with. I stayed quiet, because sometimes silence is sharper than a blade. Victor believed his intimidation worked, that I was too weak, too broken, too dependent to do anything but watch. But he couldn't see the trap he was building for himself. Every dollar he stole, every woman he slept with, every threat he made to my staff, it all piled up in the shadows. And Ned was there to collect the receipts. Victor thought he was running my empire. What he didn't know was that I had already started keeping score. And betrayal like his doesn't come without a cost. Silence has a way of making arrogant men comfortable. Victor thought my wheelchair kept me out of the game, like I had been demoted to a spectator in my own life. What he didn't know was that I was learning more by watching than I ever did by talking. From my chair at home I saw everything. The way he came in later and later, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. The way he shut doors when he answered certain phone calls. The way he leaned too close to Keisha when he thought nobody was paying attention. Every little movement was a breadcrumb. And because I didn't react, he grew bolder. Ned kept my eyes on the paper trail. Every week, he'd pass me quiet updates. Deposits skimmed, fake supply runs. Money shifted from the business into Victor's personal accounts. He even caught him moving funds through prepaid cards, trying to wash the trail like I wouldn't notice. Victor thought he was clever. But greedy men always leave fingerprints. I didn't argue with him. I didn't call him out. I let him believe I was too drained to fight. Because silence made him show me all of his cards. I learned which workers he favored, which ones he bullied, which days he slipped away to hotels, and which clients he lied to about late deliveries. I learned the patterns of his betrayal like clockwork. Even at family dinners, I sat quiet, listening to how he bragged about being the reason our businesses were still alive. He'd tell Vincent that he was teaching him how a man runs things. He'd smile at Erica and dare her to challenge him. He wanted to be seen as the savior of a family that wouldn't exist without me. And because I stayed calm, everyone else showed me exactly where they stood. My silence didn't mean weakness. It meant patience. I wanted him to feel untouchable, to keep building his castle out of lies until it was tall enough to fall on him. I didn't need to chase every rumor or confront every slip. I only needed to let the truth collect. And Ned kept stacking that truth for me. Victor believed the chair had broken me. What he didn't know was that it had sharpened me. I didn't need to move to strike. I only needed to wait. And while he was out there thinking he had silenced me, he had no idea I was already watching the end of his story write itself. Home didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield split right down the middle, and every day the line between us grew sharper. My daughter Erica was the one who stood closest to me. She didn't just see me as her mother in a chair. She saw the way Victor's voice cut when he thought no one else was listening, the way he dismissed me in front of staff, the way he pretended everything he had came from his own sweat. Erica had always been quick with her eyes. She noticed details, read people without them saying much. She knew her father wasn't the man he wanted the world to see. Vincent, on the other hand, clung to Victor like a shadow. He was his father's pride, or so he thought. Victor fed him lines about being a man, about holding authority, about how women didn't understand the weight men carried. Vincent ate it up, blind to the fact that his father was grooming him into the same arrogance. To him, Victor wasn't stealing, he was leading. He wasn't abusing power. He was just keeping people in line. At dinner, the divide showed in small ways. Erica would ask me questions directly. "Mom, how are the laundromats doing?" And Victor would cut in before I could answer, saying, "She doesn't need to worry about that, I've got it." Erica would glare across the table, fork tight in her hand, while Vincent nodded, agreeing with his father like he was learning scripture. The air grew so heavy sometimes. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest more than the straps of my chair ever did. Even the house carried the division. Erica stayed in my room longer, helping me reach things, talking through business ideas, slipping me her quiet encouragement. "Don't let him erase you, Mama." Vincent drifted toward Victor's office, listening to his father's plans, carrying himself with a pride that wasn't his own but borrowed from the man he admired. My children, two halves of the same blood, were pulled into two camps, not by choice but by the power struggle Victor created. And Victor, he thrived on it. He liked having a son to echo his words and a daughter to challenge them because either way he stayed at the center. He wanted loyalty and resistance, both revolving around him. But what he didn't realize was that the division wasn't just tearing the family apart. It was sharpening Erica into someone who refused to be silent, and strengthening me with the knowledge that at least one of my children still carried my truth. The nights grew colder in that house. Victor strutted like king of a kingdom, Vincent his heir, while Erica and I sat in the quiet, refusing to be swallowed. Two camps under one roof. And even though I kept my silence, I could feel the war brewing inside my own family. One conversation, one glare, one slammed door at a time. When my sister Carolyn Daves came down to Florida, she didn't walk through my door with small talk. She walked in with eyes wide, shaking her head before she even set her bags down. Carolyn had always been blunt, the kind of woman who believed in calling things by their real names, and what she saw in my house made her blood boil. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring hard like she was trying to pull words out of me. "Trisha," she said, "I don't even recognize this place. Since when did Victor get to run everything like he owns it?" She wasn't exaggerating. She'd been around back when I was opening my first laundromat, back when I painted walls myself and collected quarters late at night. She remembered my hands raw from folding. She knew what I had built. Seeing Victor parade around as if he was the architect of it all made her furious. She stayed for a week, and in that time she caught glimpses of the man Victor had become. She saw the way he dismissed me at dinner, the way Vincent mimicked him, the way Erica stayed close to my side. She watched Victor come home late, smelling like bars he had no business in, tossing his jacket down like he was some big executive. And she told me straight, "You've got to stop letting him turn you into a shadow in your own life. This isn't partnership. This is robbery in slow motion." Carolyn tried to stir me up, tried to put that fire back in me right there at the table. She reminded me of the woman I was before the chair, the woman who negotiated leases, who managed 5 cleaners at once, who wouldn't let anybody talk over her. She told me I was still that woman, chair or no chair. "He's counting on you feeling small," she said. "That's how he's winning." Listen. I let her words sit in the air. And then I told her the truth. "I'm not blind, Carolyn. See him. Hear him. I know exactly what he's doing. But I'm not moving yet. I'm waiting." She didn't like that answer. She wanted me to swing back immediately, to take the keys, the accounts, the staff meetings, all of it. But I had already learned that patience was sharper than any confrontation. Victor thought he was safe because I stayed quiet. That was his mistake. Carolyn leaned back, frustrated, but she respected me enough to let it rest. She hugged me before she left, whispering in my ear, "Don't let him write you out of your own story." I promised her I wouldn't. And as I watched her drive away, I knew she'd be back when the storm finally broke. She just didn't know how close it already was. It started in hushed tones, the kind of whispers a man thinks won't carry beyond the walls of his office. But walls have ears. And Victor had forgotten that loyalty runs deeper with people who respect me than it ever could with people who feared him. Ned caught wind of it first. Quiet comments slipped to vendors, paperwork drafted behind my back. My husband had decided he was done with me, and not in the way marriages normally end. He wanted to cut me out, strip me bare of everything I'd built, and rebrand himself as the sole face of the Carrington name. I heard about how he bragged to certain family members that he'd be free soon, living like a real man again, with no wife in a chair weighing him down. He spun stories about how I was incapable of running things anymore, how the empire only survived because of him. And he promised he'd show everyone what strength looked like at his 60th birthday. That party became his obsession. Every day, I watched him puff up his chest a little more, talking about caterers, musicians, the kind of suits he'd wear. He wanted a night that screamed royalty, a celebration where he could crown himself king without me anywhere near the throne. He pictured women on his arm, staff at his feet, and family toasting to his success. He wasn't just planning a birthday party. He was building a stage for his new life, and in that new life I didn't exist. Victor talked so loud, you'd think the man had already divorced me. He told Vincent that the party would be the perfect time to show people what a real man commands. He joked that Erica wouldn't be invited if she kept siding with me. And in private, I heard from Danielle and others that he was telling workers not to listen to my instructions anymore because soon I'd be out of the picture. I stayed silent, but I watched how his pride grew reckless. He wasn't hiding his mistresses anymore. He was promising them seats at his grand table, treating them like they'd earned a place in a story that wasn't even his to tell. He believed the world was his stage, and that birthday was his coronation. Victor thought he was untouchable, that I was too broken to matter. He didn't realize the higher he built his stage, the harder the fall would be. And that party he was dreaming of, it would be remembered, but not for the reasons he imagined. It was one of those evenings that felt heavier than the food on the table. Victor sat at the head of the dining room like a man rehearsing for a stage. Erica and Vincent were both there, forks scraping plates but no real conversation between them. Carolyn had come back into town, and she watched him with that sharp eye of hers, already sensing something was brewing. I stayed quiet in my chair, waiting to see what performance Victor had in store this time. He didn't waste long. He cleared his throat like he wanted the whole room's attention, then leaned back with that smug smile. His words came out smooth, almost rehearsed, like he had practiced them in the mirror. "Trisha," he said, looking dead at me, "you aren't invited to my birthday party. You're a burden." The table froze. Erica's hand dropped to her lap, her eyes fixed on her plate because she already knew what this meant. Vincent shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. He wanted to defend his father, but even he wasn't brave enough to say the words out loud in that moment. Carolyn shook her head slow, lips pressed tight like she was holding back the fire she wanted to unleash. "And me?" I laughed. It wasn't the laugh of a woman broken. It wasn't hysteria or denial. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you've already seen the ending, when the insult doesn't pierce you because you know it's about to ricochet back on the one who threw it. That laugh cut through the silence sharper than any argument I could have made. Victor's smile faltered for a second. Just a second. He wasn't expecting that. He wanted me to cry, to shrink, to beg for inclusion like some forgotten relic in his new life. Instead, I laughed, steady and unbothered, like a woman who knew more than she was letting on. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat again, and tried to carry on with his meal. But I saw the way his hand tightened on the fork, the way he glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. My laugh rattled him more than anger ever could. The children stayed quiet. Vincent looked at his father for cues, but Erica's eyes flicked up to mine, wide, questioning as if to ask, "What's next?" Carolyn reached over and patted my hand under the table. She didn't say it out loud, but I could hear her voice in my head. "That's the sound of a woman who's ready." Victor thought he had delivered a final blow. He thought that insult would cement my place in the shadows. What he didn't realize was that my laugh was the first crack in the mask he wore so proudly. And from that moment forward, everything he built for his big celebration had already started collapsing. He gave me the stage without even knowing it. And I intended to use it. That dinner shifted something inside me. The moment Victor called me a burden, I knew the time for waiting had ended. My laugh wasn't just a reaction, it was a release. It told me the silence I had carried for so long had done its job. Now it was time to move. I didn't storm out or start shouting. I didn't need to. I let Victor believe his words had landed the way he intended, while underneath, I was already pulling threads together. The first call I made was to Ned. I told him it was time to tighten the net. He didn't hesitate. Within days, he stacked more records in front of me. Bank statements that showed transfers Victor couldn't explain, receipts for hotels, charges that matched nothing legitimate in our businesses. Ned was methodical, circling the inconsistencies, connecting dots, leaving no room for doubt. Danielle, the worker who had once whispered about Victor's intimidation, finally found her courage. She came to me and said she was ready to speak up. She was tired of being bullied, tired of watching Victor treat staff like they were disposable. "He scares people into silence," she told me, "but not me anymore." I could see in her eyes she had crossed her own line. She was done letting him run unchecked. Her testimony alone was heavy, but paired with Ned's records, it was a storm waiting to break. Then came the shocker. Ned approached me one afternoon with a look on his face I hadn't seen before. Not fear, but a kind of disbelief. He told me he had tracked down a woman who had worked for me years back, right before the accident. My former housemaid, Gloria Benton. He said she had something she never told anyone. Something she had carried all this time. When I saw Gloria again, I barely recognized her. But her eyes told me she had been holding onto a truth too heavy for one person to carry alone. She sat down across from me, nervous, twisting her hands together. And then she told me. That morning before my accident, the morning my brakes failed, she saw Victor at my car. Not just near it. She saw him crouched by the wheels, tools in hand. And she had proof. Gloria had recorded him on her phone. A shaky video, but clear enough to show his hands tampering with the brakes. My chest tightened, not with surprise but with confirmation. The thought had haunted me in the quiet corners of my mind, that my accident wasn't an accident at all. Now I had the truth in front of me. Gloria told me she had been too scared to come forward back then. Victor was powerful in his own way, intimidating, controlling. She thought nobody would believe her, and she worried what he might do if he found out she had evidence. So she carried it, year after year, keeping the video hidden. Till now. I thanked her, and I meant it with everything in me. That secret she carried was the missing piece. The one truth that turned Victor's arrogance from betrayal into something darker. Attempted murder. I looked at Ned. I looked at Gloria. I thought of Danielle. And I knew I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Victor thought my silence made me weak. What he didn't see was that I was gathering an army in the shadows. And with every ally, every record, every hidden truth, his downfall wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. Victor's 60th birthday was everything he had promised himself it would be. Loud, glittering, and dripping with arrogance. He booked a hall in downtown Tampa, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed money, and filled the room with the kind of people he thought proved his worth. Mistresses on his arm, family he wanted to impress, workers he'd bullied into showing up. It was his night to shine, or so he believed. From the outside it looked like a coronation. The chandeliers poured golden light across the room. Tables were stacked with expensive food. Champagne bottles popped like he'd just won a championship. Guests clapped his back, toasted to many more years, laughed too loud at his jokes. He strutted through the crowd like a man untouchable, puffed up with pride. I wasn't there at the start. He made it clear I wasn't invited, and he expected me to sit at home, invisible. That was the mistake that blinded him. Because while he paraded around, the people he feared least were already moving through that hall with purpose. Ned was there, dressed sharp, blending into the crowd like any other guest. But he wasn't there to celebrate. He had folders, flash drives, and receipts tucked away, waiting for the right moment. Danielle came too. She wasn't loud, but her presence mattered. Someone from the inside who had lived under Victor's thumb, ready to speak truth in front of everyone. And then there was Gloria Benton. She stayed quiet, unnoticed in the back, the phone in her bag carrying the weight of a secret that could crush him. Victor greeted guests with his arms wide, making speeches about his businesses, talking about how he'd built an empire with his own 2 hands. He spun lies so easily that people nodded along, clinking glasses like they believed every word. He thought the night was his stage, but he had no idea it was a setup. Because the thing about kings who crown themselves is this: the moment they sit too high, everyone sees their flaws. And in that hall, beneath the shine and the noise, the cracks in Victor's image were already waiting to be ripped open. I stayed away at first, but not because I was excluded. I stayed away because the trap needed to close without me. Victor wanted me erased, but what he didn't know was that his downfall was already in the room, carried in the hands of the people he thought didn't matter. He wanted a night to prove his power. What he got was the opening act of his ruin. The speeches were supposed to be Victor's moment. He had lined up relatives, friends, and business contacts to toast him like a king. The first few went as planned, people praising his leadership, laughing too loudly at his stories, raising glasses to his so-called success. Victor beamed, soaking it all in, his chest rising like he was about to burst from pride. But then the shift began. Ned was the first to strike. He didn't do it with shouting or accusations. He did it with precision. While guests clapped, he slid evidence into the right hands, whispered to the right ears, and let the paper trail speak louder than any words. Bank records, withdrawal slips, unexplained transfers, all proof of how Victor had been draining the very businesses he bragged about building. A cousin glanced at the pages, frowned, and passed them on. An uncle muttered something under his breath. The whispers began to ripple through the hall like cracks spreading through glass. Then Danielle stepped forward. She had been quiet long enough, and the courage on her face told me she had waited for this moment. She spoke clear, her voice carrying over the hum of the room. She told the truth about how Victor treated staff, how he shouted, threatened, and used his position to intimidate. How he made the laundromats and rentals less about service and more about feeding his ego. And then, the part that hit hardest, how he slept with workers, crossing boundaries that should never have been crossed. Gasps cut through the crowd. Some guests stared at their drinks, uncomfortable, while others leaned in closer, eager to hear every detail. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to unease. Victor tried to laugh it off, waving his hand like it was nothing but bitter lies. But the more he dismissed her, the more the whispers grew. Faces started changing. People who had come to honor him now looked at him differently, hesitant, questioning. The shiny image he painted of himself began to peel away, and for the first time that night, his smile faltered. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted across the room, searching for someone, anyone, still clapping for him without doubt. Victor had built that night to crown himself king, but as Danielle's words spread and Ned's documents circulated, the crown began to slip. And no amount of laughter or bravado could hide the fact that the room wasn't fully his anymore. For the first time that night, Victor Carrington looked human, cornered, vulnerable, and afraid of a truth he could no longer keep buried. The tension in that hall was thick enough to choke on. By the time Danielle finished, the air was buzzing with whispers and sidelong glances. Victor tried to pull the room back with a forced laugh, raising his glass as if nothing had happened. But that smile of his was cracked now, and everyone could see it. Then Erica stood up. My daughter had been quiet until that moment, sitting stiff with her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on me from across the room. But when she rose, her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "She's telling the truth," Erica said, steady and unflinching. All eyes turned to her. "I've seen it myself. I've watched my father humiliate my mother. I've seen him sneak around with women who worked for her. He's not the man he pretends to be." The room went still. For a moment you could have heard a pin drop. Victor's face flushed red, his hand slamming down on the table as if force alone could silence his daughter. "Sit down," he hissed, but Erica didn't flinch. She looked straight at him, then at the crowd, daring anyone to doubt her. Vincent jumped up next, his voice shaking but loud. "That's a lie. She's just siding with Mom like always. Dad's the one keeping this family together. Without him, none of this exists." He tried to sound strong, but it came out desperate. People weren't nodding with him. They were staring at Victor, their expressions shifting from shock to disgust. Cousins who once admired him now turned their eyes away. Uncles who had toasted him minutes before whispered harshly, shaking their heads. The hall that had been his kingdom was slipping right out from under him. And then, from the back, another voice spoke. A voice most of them hadn't heard in years. Gloria Benton stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone made people lean closer. She introduced herself, reminding the room she had worked for our family years ago. "I never thought I'd be standing here tonight," she said, "but the truth has waited long enough." Victor's eyes widened when he saw her. He hadn't expected her, not here, not ever. His composure cracked further, the sweat on his forehead catching the light as he shifted uneasily. Gloria's hands trembled slightly, but her resolve was stronger than his denial. Everyone could feel it. The moment was building toward something that would leave no room for his lies. The whispers stopped. The hall went silent, all attention now locked on her. And in that silence, I knew the night was about to split wide open. The moment Gloria spoke, the room held its breath. She stood there in her plain dress, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to drop. "I was working in the Carrington home the morning Tricia had her accident," she said, her eyes scanning the hall. "And I saw something I can't carry any longer. I saw Victor at her car, crouched down, tampering with the brakes." The gasp that followed was sharp, like air being sucked out of the room. Victor's face drained of color. He barked out a laugh that didn't sound like him at all, too high, too forced. "This is ridiculous," he said, waving his hands as if the gesture alone could erase her words. But Gloria didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old phone. "I recorded it," she said. "I've held on to this for years." The screen flickered to life, and she lifted it for the nearest guests to see. Within seconds, the footage began circling the room. Shaky, grainy, but clear enough. Victor's hands, his face bent close to the wheel well, a wrench twisting where no wrench belonged. His voice faint in the background, muttering as he worked. The hall went silent. Dead silent. No more whispers, no more nervous laughs. Just the undeniable truth laid bare in front of everyone he had gathered to worship him. My accident hadn't been fate, hadn't been bad luck. It had been his doing. The man who stood beside me in the hospital, pretending to be my support, had been the one who put me in that chair in the first place. Erica gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Vincent stammered, trying to form words but failing. Relatives who had once clapped his back now stepped away, their eyes wide with shock and revulsion. The mistresses who had been paraded around shrank into corners, realizing the man they clung to wasn't just unfaithful. He was dangerous. Victor stumbled forward, his voice rising with desperation. "That video doesn't prove anything. She's lying. You don't know what you're looking at." But the panic in his tone only made the truth sharper. His eyes darted wild, as if searching for someone to back him, but no one did. The kingdom he thought he ruled had turned its back. I sat there watching, calm in my chair. My accident was never an accident. His attempt to end me had failed. He had left me alive, and that was his greatest mistake. Because every move he made after that morning only built the case for his own destruction. For years he thought I was the burden. But that night proved the truth. The only weight in the room was his guilt, crushing him in front of everyone who mattered. And as the video played again in trembling hands across the hall, Victor Carrington's crown didn't just crack, it shattered. By the time Gloria's video had made its way around the room, the walls of Victor's empire were already crumbling. Faces that once smiled at him now carried nothing but disgust. Voices that had toasted him minutes before now whispered his name like it was poison. He tried to recover, raising his hands, shouting over the silence. "This is a lie. She doctored it. You all know me. I would never." But the louder he screamed, the clearer it became that he was finished. What he didn't know was that Ned had already made the final move. Before the party even began, my godson had quietly tipped off the police. He had passed them the documents, the bank records, and told them where to look for proof. Gloria's video was just the nail in a coffin that had already been built. The sirens cut through the night air, faint at first, then louder until they drowned out the music in the hall. Two officers stepped through the doors, steady and direct, their presence making the room fall silent once again. Victor froze. For the first time in years, the confidence drained out of his face. He stammered, pointing wildly at Gloria, at Ned, at me. "They set me up. This is a trap." His voice cracked, breaking under the weight of his panic. The officers didn't argue with him. They had the paperwork, the reports, the proof. They told him he was under arrest. And as they pulled his arms behind his back, Victor began to unravel. He begged. He cursed. He promised to explain. "This is my party. You can't do this here." His voice echoed against the high ceilings, frantic, hollow. But nobody stepped in to help him. His mistresses slipped out the side doors, not willing to go down with him. His allies, the same men who once praised his strength, looked away, ashamed they had ever tied their names to his. Even family distanced themselves, whispering and shaking their heads, no longer fooled by his performance. And then there was Vincent. My son stood frozen, his face pale, his mouth open but no words coming out. For years he had clung to his father's image of power, had defended him, had idolized him. Now he stared at the man in handcuffs, watching the reality unfold. The disbelief in his eyes said everything. His hero was a fraud, a liar, and worse, a criminal. As they led Victor out, his voice cracked with one last desperate cry. "This isn't over." But the only sound that followed was the shuffle of his footsteps, chains rattling at his wrists, and the heavy silence of a room that had watched a king stripped of his crown. Victor Carrington thought his birthday would crown him a king. Instead, it marked the night of his fall. His pride collapsing in front of every witness he had gathered to worship him. When the sirens faded and the doors shut behind Victor, the hall stood in stunned silence. The music had stopped. The laughter that once filled the room was gone. All that remained was the wreckage of a man who had built his whole life on lies. Plates of untouched food sat cooling on tables. Champagne glasses sweated in half-clenched hands. People shifted uncomfortably, whispering in corners, no one quite sure what to say after watching a king fall. That's when I rolled in. The sound of my wheels against the polished floor carried across the room louder than any voice. Heads turned, one after another, following me as I moved to the center. Some people looked away in shame, embarrassed that they had celebrated him minutes before. Others kept their eyes on me, waiting to see if I would rage, cry, or collapse. But I did none of those things. I looked around at what was left of Victor Carrington's kingdom. Nothing. No allies, no mistresses, no family standing proudly at his side. The empire he tried to crown himself with had vanished in one night. And standing, or in my case sitting, in the middle of it all, I laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It wasn't cruel. It was the sound of release, the sound of a truth finally unchained. I let it linger, then I spoke so everyone could hear. I didn't have to destroy him. He destroyed himself. I just let the truth breathe. My words didn't need applause. They didn't need validation. They hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Some people nodded slowly, others lowered their eyes, but no one dared challenge me. Because the proof wasn't in my tone. It was in the wreckage they had all just witnessed. My body had been broken years ago, but my spirit outlasted his empire. He tried to erase me, to bury me in silence, to reduce me to a shadow in my own life. Instead, he exposed himself. All I had to do was wait, watch, and let his own arrogance tighten the rope around his neck. As I turned my chair to leave the hall, I felt the weight lift from my chest. This wasn't just revenge. It was freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when the truth finally cuts through the noise and leaves nothing standing but itself. And in that moment I knew. I didn't just survive Victor Carrington. I outlived his empire.